Royal Guard's jaw tightens. After Prince George whispers, he said no one would believe me. Soft light entered through tall windows, touching the polished floors and long corridors where every sound echoed gently. The palace was awake, but nothing felt rushed. Staff moved with purpose, guards stood at their posts, and the world outside seemed far away. One of those guards stood near a smaller sitting room not far from the family quarters. He had been in service for many years. His uniform was always neat, his posture straight, his expression calm. People often thought his job was simple: stand, watch, protect. But in truth, his work was built on awareness. He watched details others ignored: a pause that was too long, a voice that sounded different, a silence that did not belong. That morning, Prince George was supposed to be cheerful. He usually was. Curious, polite, and bright-eyed, he often asked questions about everything he saw. But today, the guard noticed something was off even before a single word was spoken. The prince walked slowly into the room, holding a small book close to his chest. His steps were careful, almost unsure. He did not look around as he normally did. Instead, his eyes stayed low, fixed on the carpet. The guard noticed the way the boy's shoulders were slightly hunched, as if he were trying to make himself smaller. The guard did not speak right away. He had learned that silence sometimes made people feel safer than questions. He remained nearby, close enough to protect, far enough not to feel threatening. Prince George sat down on a chair near the window. Outside, the gardens looked peaceful. Birds moved between trees, unaware of the worries that sometimes lived inside palace walls. The boy opened his book but did not turn a single page. Minutes passed. The guard shifted his weight slightly. The sound of his boots against the floor was soft but clear. Prince George looked up. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and the guard saw something he did not expect: fear. It was not the kind of fear that came from a bad dream or a loud noise. It was deeper, quiet. The kind children carried when they were unsure if they were allowed to speak. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," the guard said gently. Prince George nodded. "Good morning." His voice was low, too low. The guard's training told him not to press, not yet. He gave a small smile and remained where he was. The palace felt very still. Even the clock on the wall seemed to tick more softly. After a while, Prince George closed his book. His fingers tightened around the cover. He took a breath, then another, as if gathering courage. "Can I ask you something?" the boy said. The guard turned fully toward him. "Of course." Prince George hesitated. He looked toward the door, then back at the guard. His voice dropped to a whisper. "He said no one would believe me." The words were quiet, but they landed heavily. For a split second, the guard forgot the palace, the rules, the cameras, and the years of training. His jaw tightened without him realizing it. Not from anger, not yet, but from something deeper: recognition. He had heard that sentence before. Not those exact words, but the meaning. He had heard it in other places, long before he wore this uniform. It was the sound of someone being unsure if the truth mattered. The guard took a slow breath. His face remained calm, but his focus sharpened. Every instinct told him this moment was important. "Who said that?" he asked carefully. Prince George shook his head. "I don't want to say." "That's okay," the guard replied. "You don't have to say anything you don't want to." The boy relaxed just a little. His shoulders lowered by the smallest amount. The guard crouched slightly, lowering himself to the prince's level, making sure his tone stayed steady. "But I want you to know something," he continued. "I'm listening." Prince George's eyes filled with emotion, though no tears fell. He swallowed and looked down at his hands. "I didn't do anything wrong," he whispered. The guard felt a weight settle in his chest. Children did not say things like that unless they were trying to protect themselves. "I believe you," the guard said. The words were simple, honest, and they mattered. Prince George looked up again, surprise crossing his face. "You do?" "Yes," the guard answered without hesitation. "And it's my job to make sure you are safe." The boy did not speak, but something changed in his expression. It was small, but the guard noticed. A hint of relief, a crack in the wall of fear. The guard stood back up, returning to his post, but his mind was no longer calm. His training moved into place piece by piece. He reminded himself not to assume, not to rush. But ignoring what had just happened was not an option. Throughout the rest of the morning, the guard stayed close. He noticed how Prince George flinched slightly at sudden sounds, how he stayed near familiar faces, how he avoided being alone. None of it was loud. None of it would stand out to someone who was not watching carefully, but the guard was watching. At lunch, the prince barely touched his food. The guard noted it. Later, during a scheduled activity, George seemed distracted, his answers delayed. The palace continued as usual around them. Meetings were held. Phones rang. Staff came and went. To the outside world, everything looked perfect. But the guard carried the boy's words with him like a warning bell that would not stop ringing. He said no one would believe me. The guard knew what his duty was, not just to stand between danger and the royal family, but to listen when something felt wrong, especially when it came from a child. He followed procedure quietly, carefully. He did not speak to just anyone. He wrote notes. He observed patterns. He stayed professional. But deep inside, he made a promise to himself and to the boy who had trusted him with a whisper. No matter how small the voice, no matter how powerful the silence around it, he would not ignore it. As the day drew to a close, Prince George passed by the guard once more. This time he paused. "Thank you," the boy said softly. The guard nodded. "Any time." The prince walked away, a little steadier than before. The guard remained at his post, his jaw still tight, not from fear, but from resolve. Because sometimes protecting someone did not begin with action or force. Sometimes it began with believing a single sentence spoken in a whisper. That night, the palace lights dimmed as they always did, room by room, hallway by hallway. From the outside, everything looked calm and unchanged. Inside, however, the royal guard's mind would not rest. He stood at his post, back straight, eyes forward, just as he had done thousands of times before. But tonight, his thoughts moved faster than his steps ever could. The boy's words repeated again and again in his head, clear as if they were spoken only seconds ago. He said no one would believe me. The guard had been trained to control emotion. He had learned how to remain calm during pressure, how to separate feeling from duty. Still, some words did not fade easily. These words stayed. He reminded himself of one important rule: do not jump to conclusions. A guard must be careful. Acting too fast could cause confusion. Acting too slow could cause regret. The balance between the two was where real responsibility lived. As the hours passed, the guard watched everything more closely than usual. Every interaction, every voice, every change in routine. He did not stare or make others uncomfortable. He simply observed quietly as he always had. Prince George passed through the corridor with a member of staff. The guard noticed the way the boy kept a careful distance, how he stayed slightly behind instead of walking freely. When spoken to, George answered politely, but without energy. His smile appeared only when necessary, like a mask put on and taken off. The guard felt a familiar weight in his chest. Not fear, concern. Later, during a short break, the guard reviewed his training in his mind. Children often spoke in pieces, not full stories. They tested trust slowly. Pressing too hard could close the door forever. Patience was not weakness, it was protection. The guard knew one thing clearly: whatever was troubling the boy, it was real to him, and that alone made it important. The next morning came with soft rain tapping against the windows. The palace smelled of fresh tea and polished wood. The guard returned to duty early, positioning himself where he could see Prince George clearly without being obvious. The boy entered the room quietly. He paused when he saw the guard and gave a small nod. It was not much, but the guard noticed. Trust did not appear all at once. It grew in small moments like this. As the morning went on, the guard noticed patterns forming. Prince George stayed closer to certain people and avoided others without explanation. When asked to move to a different room, he hesitated before agreeing. When someone spoke loudly, he became tense. None of these moments alone meant anything. Together, they formed a picture the guard could not ignore. Still, he said nothing. Not yet. At midday, the guard was briefly relieved by another officer. As he walked down the corridor, he stopped near a window and looked out at the courtyard below. People often believed guards felt nothing. That was never true. Guards felt deeply. They simply learned when to speak and when to wait. He asked himself a hard question. What if I am wrong? The answer came quietly. Then I will still have done my duty by caring. Later that afternoon, the guard found a moment alone with Prince George again. Not planned, not forced, just a quiet space that happened naturally. The boy stood near a table, turning a small object in his hands. The guard did not speak at first. He waited. Prince George broke the silence. "Am I in trouble?" The guard turned slowly. "Why would you be?" The boy shrugged. "Sometimes when grown-ups get quiet." The guard chose his words carefully. "You are not in trouble. You haven't done anything wrong." Prince George looked at him closely as if checking for honesty. "You won't tell someone who will be mad." "I will only tell people whose job it is to help," the guard said. "And I will be careful." The boy nodded, though he did not speak further. That was enough for now. That evening the guard followed procedure. He did not raise alarm. He did not accuse. He documented behavior, timing, changes in mood. He spoke quietly to a senior officer he trusted, someone experienced, someone who understood discretion. "I may be mistaken," the guard said calmly, "but something feels off. The child seems afraid to speak." The senior officer listened without interruption. He did not dismiss the concern. He did not overreact either. He asked questions, clear, thoughtful ones. They agreed on a plan that focused on observation and safety. Nothing dramatic, nothing sudden, just careful steps forward. Over the next few days, the guard noticed small improvements. Prince George spoke a little more. He laughed once during a simple conversation. He stayed longer in shared spaces, but the fear had not disappeared. It lingered, quiet and watchful. One afternoon, as they walked past a long hallway lined with portraits, Prince George stopped suddenly. "Do guards ever feel scared?" he asked. The guard considered the question. "Sometimes," he said honestly, "but being scared doesn't mean we stop doing what's right." Prince George thought about that. "Then why do people say things that make others scared?" The guard did not answer right away. Some questions did not have simple answers. "Sometimes people forget how much words can matter," he finally said. Prince George nodded slowly, as if storing the thought away. That night the guard stood alone once more, watching the quiet halls. He felt the weight of responsibility, but also a steady sense of purpose. He was not there to be noticed. He was there to protect, even when protection meant listening more than acting. He remembered his own early days in service, when a senior guard once told him, "The most important moments rarely come with warning." This was one of those moments. As days passed, the palace continued to move like clockwork. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, however, a silent line had been drawn, one that would not be crossed. The guard stayed alert. He stayed patient. He stayed human. And in that quiet commitment, something powerful was already taking shape, not through force or authority, but through trust carefully earned. The boy had spoken once. Now the guard would make sure that voice was never ignored. The days that followed moved slowly on the surface, but underneath, everything was changing. The palace still looked calm, organized, and steady, just as it always had. Visitors came and went. Staff followed schedules. Guards stood at their posts. Yet for the royal guard who had listened to the prince's whisper, nothing felt ordinary anymore. He adjusted his routine without drawing attention. It was not something written down or announced. It was instinct. He positioned himself closer to Prince George during walks through long corridors. He made sure the boy was never rushed from one place to another. If plans shifted, the guard stayed alert, watching reactions, reading small signs. Prince George noticed. The boy began to look for the guard without meaning to. When entering a room, his eyes searched quietly until they found the familiar uniform. When he saw the guard nearby, his shoulders relaxed just a little. It was not obvious. Only someone trained to notice details would have seen it. One afternoon, a sudden change in schedule required Prince George to move to a different room earlier than planned. The announcement was gentle, polite, and normal. Still, the boy froze. The guard noticed instantly. "It's all right," he said calmly, stepping closer but not touching. "We'll go together." Prince George nodded. He did not ask questions. He simply walked beside the guard, matching his pace step by step. That was when the guard fully understood something important. Safety was not always about walls or locks. Sometimes it was about presence. From that day on, the guard became what he thought of as a quiet shadow, always there, never overwhelming. He spoke softly. He listened more than he talked. He made no promises he could not keep. Other guards noticed the change, but they trusted him. He had earned that trust over years of service. No one questioned his choices. Prince George slowly began to open in small ways, not with full stories, not with clear explanations, just pieces. Once, while standing near a window watching the rain, the boy said, "Some people sound nice but don't feel nice." The guard did not react strongly. He nodded. "You're very good at noticing feelings." Another time, the boy asked, "If someone important makes a mistake, do others still tell the truth?" The guard thought carefully before answering. "They should," he said. "Truth doesn't stop being important because someone is powerful." Prince George was quiet after that, but the question itself told the guard a lot. Behind the scenes, the guard continued to document everything. Dates, behaviors, small emotional shifts. He shared only with those who needed to know, following proper steps. He chose his words carefully, keeping facts clear and calm. No drama, no accusations, just concern. One evening, a senior official quietly observed Prince George during a routine activity. Nothing unusual happened. The boy behaved well, spoke politely, and followed instructions. To anyone watching casually, he seemed fine, but the guard noticed something else. Prince George avoided certain areas of the room. He stayed close to exits. He checked the door more than once. The official left without comment. Later that night, the guard stood alone in the hallway, hands folded behind his back. He felt the pressure building. Doing nothing was easier. Speaking up required strength. He reminded himself why he had chosen this career in the first place: to protect, not to look away. The next morning brought a small but meaningful moment. Prince George approached the guard on his own. "Can I tell you something?" the boy asked quietly. "Of course," the guard replied. Prince George hesitated, then said, "I don't feel scared all the time now." The guard smiled gently. "That's good." "But sometimes," the boy continued, "I still think about what was said." The guard nodded. "That makes sense." Prince George looked up. "You didn't forget?" "No," the guard said, "I won't." Those two words mattered more than any promise could. As the days passed, subtle changes were made to schedules and supervision. Nothing that caused alarm, nothing that felt like punishment, just thoughtful adjustments that placed Prince George in safer, more comfortable spaces. The boy began to laugh more freely. He talked about small things, books, animals, questions about the world. The guard listened, responding when needed, staying steady. Yet the guard knew this was not the end. Trust was growing, but truth still waited beneath the surface. One afternoon, during a quiet break, Prince George sat beside the guard in a peaceful corner of the palace. "Why do you stay so calm?" the boy asked. The guard considered the question. "Because when someone is worried, they need calm around them." Prince George nodded slowly. "I like that." The guard felt a tightness in his chest, not pain but responsibility. That evening another careful meeting took place. No raised voices, no urgency in tone, just professionals doing what they were trained to do. The guard shared what he had seen. Others shared their observations too. Together, a picture began to form. They agreed on next steps that focused on care, listening, and support. The goal was simple: protect the child and make sure his voice mattered. The guard left the meeting feeling both heavy and hopeful. Late that night, as he walked through the silent corridors, he passed the room where Prince George slept. A soft light glowed beneath the door. The guard paused briefly, not to intrude but to stand watch. He thought about how easily moments could be missed, how easily words could be ignored, how different everything would be if he had brushed off that whisper. He said no one would believe me. The guard believed him, and because of that the palace was changing, not loudly, not suddenly, but carefully and correctly. The next morning Prince George greeted the guard with a small smile that reached his eyes. "Good morning," the boy said. "Good morning," the guard replied. The exchange was simple, but it carried weight. It meant safety. It meant trust. The guard knew there was still more to come. Conversations yet to happen, truths yet to be spoken. But he also knew this much: the hardest part had already passed. Someone had listened. Someone had stayed. And that made all the difference. The change did not come all at once. It came quietly, like the first light of morning that slowly fills a dark room. Inside the palace, careful steps were being taken, though most people never noticed them. To the outside world, everything still looked perfect. Inside, however, something important was happening. Prince George was no longer left to manage his feelings alone. A small team of trusted adults began to spend more time around him. They were calm, kind, and patient. No one rushed him. No one demanded answers. They spoke to him the way children should always be spoken to, with respect. The royal guard stayed close, just as he always had. He did not lead the process. He did not speak over others. His role was simple but powerful: remain present, steady, and observant. One afternoon, Prince George was invited to sit in a quiet room filled with soft light. The furniture was comfortable, the space warm and peaceful. Nothing about the room felt official or frightening. It felt safe. The guard stood just outside the door, within sight. He could not hear what was being said, but he could see the boy's face through the glass panel. At first, Prince George sat stiffly, hands folded in his lap. His eyes moved toward the door more than once. The guard met his gaze and gave a small nod. Prince George took a slow breath. Inside the room, a gentle voice spoke to him. The words were simple: "You can talk if you want, you can stop any time." For a long moment the boy said nothing. Time passed. Then quietly he began to speak. Not everything, not all at once. Just enough. The guard saw the boy's shoulders relax as the minutes went by. He saw the tight grip on the chair loosen. He saw something he had hoped for: relief. When the door finally opened, Prince George walked out slowly. His eyes were red, but his expression was calm. He looked at the guard. "You were right," the boy said softly. "They listened." The guard felt a weight lift from his chest. "I'm glad," he replied. From that day on, things began to move forward more clearly, still quietly, still carefully, but forward. Adjustments were made to routines. Some interactions were limited, some schedules changed. Nothing was explained openly, and nothing needed to be. The focus was not on blame or noise. It was on safety and care. Prince George began to sleep better. The dark circles under his eyes faded. He laughed more easily without checking the room first. When he spoke, his voice carried confidence again. The guard noticed everything. One morning, as they walked through the gardens, Prince George ran ahead for the first time in days. He stopped near a tree and turned back, smiling. "Did you see that?" he asked. "I did," the guard said. The boy laughed. It was a real laugh, free and light. That sound stayed with the guard for the rest of the day. Behind the scenes, Conversations continued among adults who understood the responsibility they carried. They spoke calmly, carefully, and with purpose. Every decision was weighed. Every step was guided by one clear goal: protect the child and respect his voice. No one rushed to conclusions. No one ignored the signs. The guard was asked questions, not as an accusation but as part of understanding. He answered honestly, sticking to facts and observations. He never exaggerated. He never softened the truth either. His calm professionalism made a difference. One evening, after a long day, the guard stood by the window looking out at the city lights beyond the palace walls. He thought about how easily things could have gone differently. How easily he could have dismissed that whisper as imagination or stress, but he hadn't. Prince George approached quietly and stood beside him. "Are you tired?" the boy asked. "A little," the guard admitted. "Me too," Prince George said. Then, after a pause, "But I feel better tired now," the guard smiled. "That's a good kind of tired." Prince George leaned against the window and looked out. "Do you think other kids feel like this sometimes?" The guard nodded. "I think many do." "Who listens to them?" the boy asked. The guard looked down at him. "People should, and sometimes people like us have to make sure they do." Prince George thought about that. "I'm glad you listened." "So am I," the guard said. As days turned into weeks, the situation settled into a new normal. Prince George returned to his lessons, his routines, his curious questions about the world. He was still thoughtful, still sensitive, but no longer afraid to speak. The guard noticed that the boy no longer whispered when he had something to say. One afternoon, during a group activity, Prince George raised his hand and shared an idea confidently. The guard watched from across the room, feeling something close to pride, not because of the words spoken, but because of the strength behind them. Later that evening, a senior official stopped beside the guard. "You did the right thing," the official said quietly. The guard nodded. "I did my duty." "That's not always the same thing," the official replied, then walked on. The guard understood what was meant. Duty was written in rules. Doing the right thing sometimes required more. As night fell, the palace grew quiet again. The guard returned to his post near the family quarters. He stood tall, alert, and calm, just as he always had. Prince George passed by on his way to rest. He stopped and looked up. "Good night," he said. "Good night," the guard replied. The boy hesitated, then added, "I'm not scared tonight." The guard felt his throat tighten slightly, but his voice remained steady. "That's how it should be." Prince George nodded and walked on. The guard stayed where he was, listening to the familiar sounds of the palace settling into sleep. He knew there was still work to be done. Healing was not a straight path. Trust took time. But something important had already happened. A child had spoken. An adult had listened. And the silence that once felt heavy had finally begun to lift. In that quiet victory, the guard found his purpose renewed, not just as a protector of walls and halls, but as a protector of voices that deserved to be heard. The palace slowly returned to a rhythm that felt lighter than before. Nothing dramatic was announced, no public statements were made, and no attention was drawn to what had happened. Yet for those who were close, the change was clear. The air felt calmer. The tension that once sat quietly in corners had eased. Prince George moved through his days with new confidence. He walked with his head up, asked questions without hesitation, and spoke when something mattered to him. His laughter came easily now, not forced or careful but natural. The guard noticed how the boy no longer checked the room before speaking. He no longer searched faces to see if it was safe to talk. That alone told the guard everything he needed to know. One morning, Prince George joined a small group activity. He listened, shared ideas, and even disagreed politely when he felt strongly about something. No one corrected him for speaking. No one dismissed his thoughts. He was heard. The guard watched from a distance, hands behind his back, posture steady. He did not smile openly, but inside he felt something settle, a quiet sense of relief. Later that day, the boy approached him again, holding a small piece of paper. It was a simple drawing, figures standing side by side. "I made this," Prince George said. The guard crouched slightly to look. "It's very good." "It's you and me," the boy explained. "You're taller," the guard nodded. "That seems accurate," Prince George smiled. "You stayed." "Yes," the guard replied, "I stayed." That word carried weight. Stayed meant something now. As time passed, the palace continued its work. Schedules were followed, duties were performed, lessons were taught. Yet something important had changed beneath it all. Awareness had grown. Listening had become part of protection. The guard noticed it in small ways. Adults paused before speaking. They watched reactions more carefully. They gave children space to express feelings instead of rushing them along. It was not perfect, but it was better. One afternoon, the guard was asked to attend a brief meeting. Nothing formal. Just a quiet conversation among professionals who understood responsibility. "You helped prevent something worse," one of them said. The guard shook his head. "I just listened." "Not everyone does," the person replied. The guard left the meeting without pride or expectation. He returned to his post as always. Standing guard was not about recognition. It was about presence. That evening, Prince George walked beside him through a long hallway. The portraits on the walls watched silently, reminders of history and duty. "Do you think I'll remember all this when I'm older?" the boy asked. The guard thought for a moment. "You might not remember every detail," he said, "but you'll remember how it felt." Prince George nodded. "I want to remember feeling safe." "You will," the guard said. They reached the end of the hallway. Prince George stopped and looked up. "If someone tells you something important, you shouldn't ignore it," he said seriously. "That's true," the guard agreed. "Even if they're small," the boy added. "Especially then," the guard said. The boy smiled, satisfied, and continued on his way. That night the guard stood alone near the window, watching the palace lights reflect against the dark sky. He thought about all the moments in life that passed quietly, unseen by most. Moments that changed everything without noise or attention. He thought about how easy it would have been to dismiss a whisper, to tell himself it was nothing, to move on. But he hadn't. Weeks later, Prince George participated in a public event. He stood confidently, greeted people politely, and spoke clearly when addressed. Those watching saw a young prince doing what was expected of him. Only a few knew how much strength that confidence represented. The guard stood nearby, alert but calm. His role remained the same: to protect, to observe, to be ready. But now, his understanding of protection felt deeper. Protection was not just about stopping harm. It was about making space for truth. As the event ended, Prince George glanced back and caught the guard's eye. He gave a small nod. The guard returned it. Nothing more needed to be said. Later, as night settled in and the palace grew quiet, the guard took his place near the family quarters. The familiar stillness surrounded him. He welcomed it. Prince George passed by once more, ready to rest. "Good night," the boy said. "Good night," the guard replied. Prince George paused. "You know," he said, "I think people believe me now." The guard felt a quiet warmth rise in his chest. "They should have all along." The boy nodded and walked on, his steps light and steady. The guard remained at his post, listening to the sounds of the palace at rest. He reflected on the journey, not just of the child, but of himself. He had learned that strength was not always loud. Courage did not always wear armor. Sometimes courage sounded like a calm voice saying, "I believe you." The guard straightened his shoulders, ready for whatever came next. He knew challenges would return. They always did. But he also knew this truth would guide him. Voices matter, listening matters, and believing someone can change the course of everything. As the lights dimmed and silence filled the halls, the guard stood watch, not just over a palace but over a promise kept.